Russia's only aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov, erupted in flames recently. The damage is serious, and according to one source, stated that repairs could total $1.5 billion. The fire is just the most recent incident in a long history of problems that the ship has dealt with. The latest event again brings up the question, is it time to decommission the Admiral Kuznetsov? Is it becoming more of a liability for Russia than an asset? But first, this episode's sponsor, the Ridge Wallet. This sponsor was absolutely perfect for me. A few months ago, I stopped using my old, bulky wallet. It was really annoying to carry around. When I heard of Ridge Wallet, it was a perfect fit for me. I've been using it myself, and I'm going to continue to use it. It's small, sleek, looks good, and works great. Another great thing is it's guaranteed for life. So if it wears down or loosens, you're covered. It also came with this mini screwdriver to tighten the screws if necessary. You also get 10% off with promo code COVERTCABAL, no space. Go check them out. That is the Ridge Wallet. Russia's sole aircraft carrier plays somewhat of a different role than the large supercarriers of the US. The United States uses their carriers to project power across the seas, and most major conflicts the US has been involved in occur far away from the US mainland. They use these as mobile air bases, so they can launch aircraft into regions where they may not operate air bases, or are restricted by other nations' airspace from conducting such missions. Russia's carrier, on the other hand, is not even really a carrier. The Russians consider it a heavy cruiser that can carry aircraft, and that explains a lot about the role it was designed to play in their navy. Its original role was to defend Soviet coasts from NATO warships, submarines, and bombers. To do this, the ship is highly armed, carrying a dozen massive P-700 supersonic anti-ship cruise missiles, a large number of short-range air defense weaponry, along with a few dozen fighter jets and helicopters. In short, it's more of a defensive weapon than the US carriers, which are more offensive. Before the Admiral Kuznetsov was the Kiev-class carriers, which also played a similar role. As you can see, the ship resembles more of a cruiser than an aircraft carrier, with its foredeck being full of guns and missiles, and a flight deck which appears as more of an add-on. And even before the Kiev class was the Moskva class, which could not carry any fixed-wing aircraft. You can see the evolution over the three classes, slowly becoming closer to what we think of as a modern aircraft carrier, which was the ultimate goal of the Soviet Union. They had planned for years to develop large carriers similar to that of the United States. They in fact began work on the Ulyanovsk class, but due to budgetary issues and the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union, it was never finished. After the collapse, the two Moskva-class ships, 4 Kiev-class, and the other Kuznetsov-class ship were decommissioned, leaving Russia with its sole aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov. With the extreme difficult economic situation in Russia in the early 1990s, the ship spent its first decade in port, slowly deteriorating. An interesting side note, many criticize the Kuznetsov as being old. The ship is actually not that old, as it was laid down in 1982 and commissioned in 1991. Compare this to the US Nimitz class, whose first ship was laid down in the late 1960s and commissioned in 1975. Many of the problems with the Kuznetsov stem from its lack of maintenance and upkeep over the years. The carrier has had numerous major incidents throughout its life. During its first deployment in 1996, its evaporators broke down, causing a severe freshwater shortage for its crew, in which the US Navy came to its rescue. There have been multiple fires, a massive oil spill, aircraft falling off into the sea, system failures, including its arresting cables, which are used during aircraft landings, and its propulsion. Due to these problems, it always travels with one or more tugboats to haul it into a port in case of breakdowns. Between its few short deployments and sea trials, the ship has been in port, often undergoing maintenance, replacing, and repairing systems. It was during one of these refurbishments that the floating dry dock it was sitting in, PD-50, sank in late October of 2018. During the incident, a 70-ton crane fell, crashing onto the flight deck of the carrier, reportedly creating a 20-square-meter hole, and likely damaging other systems, including an air defense system on the edge of the ship. The sinking of the dock puts the ship's future in jeopardy, as Russia currently does not have any other large enough dock to hold the carrier for future repairs. The ship was towed just up the river to Shipyard number 35, where it has remained ever since, where it is undergoing more repairs. The recent fire is only the latest in a series of troubles for the carrier. According to TASS, 120 square meters was engulfed in flames, and RT stated it was much larger, covering 600 square meters. Several crew members were reportedly injured, along with one loss of life. On top of this, an unnamed source in the Russian Navy's Northern Fleet stated that it is going to cost them $1.5 billion to repair the ship. Estimates vary, but this was by all indications a very serious fire. Besides these incidents, the ship itself has many faults. Its ski jump method of launching aircraft mean that the fighters cannot carry a full payload and fuel. This means shorter missions and airborne time. During its 2016 deployment, it had to stay real close to the Syrian coast so that its aircraft could get back to the carrier before running out of fuel after completing their mission. It also carries relatively few aircraft. This, along with numerous mechanical problems, has led to a very low sortie rate, around 15 per day, compared to the US carriers capable of around 150 a day. Its oil-fired boilers are yet another problem for the ship. They are notoriously unreliable and have broken down numerous times, and are mostly responsible for the large smoke plume often seen emitting from the ship. I think it's worth mentioning that this image here, which is often stated to be smoke from the Russian aircraft carrier seen from space, is not real. It's a Photoshop version of this picture of Mount Etna's 2002 eruption. At a closer look, you can actually see the botched Photoshop job. But the ship undoubtedly has some serious problems, and those problems are mounting. Every time something goes wrong with the carrier, you see stories and articles about the possibility of Russia finally scrapping the ship. Yet each time they publicly state that they will repair and keep it operational. But with the problems getting worse, it might finally be time for them to take a serious look at whether keeping it running is worth the expense. Part of the reason they keep it running might be for propaganda purposes. The world's strongest navies all have carriers. The US, UK, China, France, India, even the Japanese technically can consider themselves part of the club once they operate the F-35Bs from the deck of the Izumo-class ships. By decommissioning the Kuznetsov, Russia will be leaving that exclusive club. Another reason could be to keep the crews, personnel, and shipyard workers trained and maintain the skills needed to operate an aircraft carrier for a future ship. This was actually part of the Kuznetsov original roles, to be a stepping stone toward operating a full-size carrier, the Ulyanovsk, which began construction in 1988. The Russians have been discussing a replacement for the Kuznetsov for years now. Efforts such as Project 23,000E seem to face endless delays and cancellations. Also, all previous carriers built by the Soviet Union were constructed in what is now called the Black Sea Shipyard, which is located in Ukraine. As we know, Ukraine and Russia are not on good terms. It's questionable if Russia has access to a shipyard large enough to construct a new aircraft carrier. These giant ships require equally giant shipyards to build them. It is extremely difficult to construct these massive, complex ships. Also massive is the cost. After a difficult few years, the Russian economy has now rebounded out of a recession and now growing at a decent rate. So it is possible that Russia could actually go through with constructing a new carrier. Another possibility is Russia purchasing one or more aircraft carriers from China. China has just exploded in the last decade in terms of shipbuilding. In 1998, China purchased an unfinished Kuznetsov-class carrier from Ukraine. They finished the construction themselves and became operational as China's first carrier in 2012. Next, they built another carrier by themselves from the ground up, which is similar in size and appearance to the Soviet ship. And now they are reportedly moving right on to building a supercarrier. With a planned displacement of just over 100,000 tons and nuclear powered, it will equal that of the US Ford-class supercarriers. It is possible that China, in order to continue expanding their shipbuilding industry, would be willing to construct and sell one to Russia in the future. Many nations, including Russia, like to try to have their naval ships built domestically. That way, you keep the shipyard workers employed, and you don't lose the skills and knowledge for the future. But Russia has shown willingness to look elsewhere for its navy. In 2010, Russia signed a deal to purchase 2 Mistral-class amphibious assault ships constructed in France. Both ships were built. However, the deal eventually collapsed due to the events in Crimea. So it is possible, however, probably unlikely, that Russia could buy aircraft carriers from China. And finally, does Russia even need an aircraft carrier? As mentioned earlier, the Moskva, Kiev, and Kuznetsov classes played a different role than the American ones. They were never meant as blue water ships, meaning not designed to go out and fight in the open ocean. and Russia's current focus on more nearby locales such as Europe and the Middle East make it less necessary to have these large ships. It's also unlikely that Russia would be willing to commit to a massive investment in obtaining a true blue water navy complete with aircraft carrier strike groups anytime soon. Instead, Russia has seemed more focused on rebuilding its submarine and surface fleet of corvettes and frigates. So with the Admiral Kuznetsov nearing the end of its life, and costs to keep it running skyrocketing, the future of the Russian Navy looks likely to be one without a carrier. But only time will tell.